Hey traders, welcome to the most comprehensive beginner guide to Pine Script on the internet. My name is Matt and I run the trading blog and YouTube channel The Art of Trading. Nice to meet you. I've been programming for 15 years and I've been trading profitably for around 3 years as of recording this. And during those 3 years, I've spent hundreds of hours studying Pine Script for the TradingView charting platform. So I'm uniquely positioned to teach you Pine Script in a way that most programmers can't. Not only do I have a thorough understanding of the Pine Script programming language, I also know how to use it to enhance the profitability of my trading strategies. And in today's video, I'm going to give you a crash course into the basics of Pine Script so that you can hopefully enhance the profitability of your own trading. The content in this video was taken from my free basics course over at pinescriptmastery.com, but I had to strip out about an hour's worth of content covering the basic theory of programming in order to keep this video under 2 hours. So if you're completely new to programming and you've never written a line of code in your entire life, then I suggest you go to pinescriptmastery.com and take my free basics course on Pine Script, which goes into much more detail about the fundamentals of programming than this video will. I hope you enjoy these lessons and find them valuable. If you do, please help me out by hitting the like button. It's free, but it helps me out a lot by boosting this video's rankings. And hit the subscribe button while you're there if you want to learn more about Pine Script, because I release new video lessons on Pine Script each and every month. But without further ado, I don't want to keep you waiting. Let's get into the course material. I hope you enjoy it, have fun, and I'll see you on the other side.
So this is just going to be a quick introduction to the Pine Editor interface. So if you come down to this little tab down here that says Open Pine Script Editor, click on that. This will bring up the coding box for Pine Script. And this is great. The fact that this is inbuilt into the TradingView platform and you can load this into your browser is amazing. If you've ever used any other programming languages and you know how hard it is sometimes to download and set up an IDE, Integrated Development Environment, in order to write your code, well, Pine Script has all of that inbuilt into the platform right in your browser, which is amazing. And so right here, I have a blank script, and this just opens up the blank script template. And all we have here is our header comment, our compiler directive, a study call with a title, and we're drawing the closing price to the chart. So I'm not going to do any coding in this lesson. I'm just going to introduce you to what all these buttons do. So up here we have open. If you click on that, you can open any of the scripts that you're working on that you've saved. If you click new, you can select from a big long list of templates. So if I click volume, then we'll get a volume example script. If I click new blank strategy script, we'll get a strategy example script. And there's quite a few options here, but we'll just leave as blank indicator script for now. And if I hit save, now I can name the script and save it into my script list. And then later on when I come back to up to open, it'll be listed in here. Next up we have add to chart. So if I click on that, that'll just add the script code to the actual chart. Then we have publish script, which we'll go over much later. This is used for publishing your scripts publicly or privately to the official TradingView script collection. Then we have the help section. There's a lot of valuable information here. You have the user manual, and if you click on these, it'll open up a new tab with the documentation for Pine Script, which can be really helpful, especially when you're new to coding in Pine. But perhaps the most useful reference here that you can't get anywhere else is the shortcuts. If you click Pine Editor Keyboard Shortcuts, that'll bring up a list of the keyboard shortcuts you can use in the Pine Editor to dramatically speed up your workflow. And there's a lot of shortcuts here. We're not going to go over all of these, but if you want to check them out, just come up to the settings menu and click on this button here. And there's a few other options here. You can go to Stack Overflow, where there's a bunch of questions and answers about Pine Script. We have the Pine Coders resources and Pine tutorials on the Codify website. These two are very valuable resources if you run into any issues with your scripts. And of course, you can always reference existing scripts on the public script library. Just look for open source scripts that are trying to achieve the similar thing that you're trying to achieve, and you can learn a lot from reverse engineering what other Pine coders have written. So now if I save this script and I call it, let's just call it PSMC editor intro. And so now if I click save, that will add this script to my list of indicators. So now if I come up and click open, here's the script there. And so these buttons up here, if I click on this, I can rename the script. If I click on this little star icon, that will add it to my favorites list. So now when I come up to open, it's listed at the top here. PSMC editor intro. And finally, we have this little version number, which is really cool. This is a great feature. So what this is doing is it's saving backups of your script as you edit it and as you save new versions and changes to the script. So for example, if I change the title here to PSMC editor intro and I save the script, you'll see this changes to 2. Now if I do a little bit more, let's get an RSI input title, RSI type input dot integer, default value 14. Now if I save the script, it will change to 3. And now if I calculate an RSI and I save the script again, and then I copy and paste this down here, save the script, we're now drawing an RSI onto our chart. And if I open up this little editor here and I click on this little version number, you can see it's listing all of the versions that we just made of this script. So if I click on 1, we'll go back to the very beginning. If I click on 3, you can see that we've got our RSI input here, but we're not drawing the RSI yet. If I go to the latest version, there's all of our code, our latest version of the code. So this is awesome. This means that you do not need to back up your scripts if you don't want to. Obviously, if you're making a lot of changes to your scripts, it can be helpful to have your own backup versions. Once you get up into the 20s or 30s, this list can get quite long and hard to find a previous version of your script. But if you make a long script and you realize you screwed something up and you can't remember when you did it, or you're not sure what you did and you want to go back, you want to revert your script back to a previous version, you can just click on this and go back to whichever version you need to in order to fix the problem and start doing whatever you were trying to do again. So that's a great little feature there. The next thing I want to mention is the control space tool. If you start writing a line of code and you hit control space, the Pine editor will list any relevant inbuilt variables or function names relating to what you've already written. So here I've written input dot control space, and this lists all of the inbuilt input variables that I have to choose from. And you can just click on them in order to select them. And finally, if you hover your mouse over an inbuilt variable or an inbuilt function, you'll get some documentation information there. And here it will tell you the syntax for using this inbuilt variable or function, and it'll list all of the function parameters you have to work with, and it'll tell you what the function or inbuilt variable returns. And of course, if you want to get more information, you can just hold down Control or Command on a Mac and click on this variable or function, and it will open up the inbuilt Pine Script language reference manual and give you a lot more information on whatever function or inbuilt parameter or variable that you're using. And you can search through here if you want to, which is really cool. And I think that's about it for the Pine Editor intro. That's all the most important information you need to know about the Pine Editor interface. Hey coders, welcome to the lesson on comments. So comments in Pine Script are ways of leaving notes for yourself. You can write them in lines like this. And if you put 2 forward slashes at the start of the line, then the compiler, the Pine Script compiler, will ignore this line and it will not be treated as a line of code. The only exception for this is this line here. Now this is what's called a compiler directive. And what it's doing is telling the Pine Script compiler which version of the Pine Script syntax to target when compiling or interpreting this script or the code of this script. So this line here is saying, set the version parameter of this script to Pine Script version 4. You could change this to version 3 and save it. The Pine code of this script will now be compiled using the version 3 syntax. So if we were to try to change the color of this plot to something like color.red and we hit save, we'll get an error because version 3 of Pine Script does not know what color.red is. That's a new syntax format of Pine Script version 4. So if I change this back to version 4, not 43, we're not there yet. If I change that to version 4 and hit save, it will now compile and draw to the chart with no issues. Now the purpose of allowing you to change the version of Pine Script is to allow for backwards compatibility. So if you were to have written a script a few years ago, for example, in version 3 or 2 of Pine Script syntax, then you can still target that version of code to interpret your script. That way you don't have to convert it into the latest version of Pine Script code if you don't want to. So there are a lot of old scripts floating around the internet that still work if you leave their old version compiler directive in. So that's what this line of code does, this compiler directive. These lines of codes up here are simply for human eyes only. And the purpose of this is to comment your code so that you know, and others who may look at your code later, know exactly what it is you're trying to achieve with your code. So for example, you could write here, draw the closing price to the chart. Hit save. And now this will compile and Pine Script will ignore this comment, this line here. There's also a hotkey you can use to do this. So if you hold Control and press /, Pine Script will draw in your comment tag or your comment prefix. So that's a handy shortcut that can speed up your workflow. You can also hover over a line of code and press Control / and it will comment out this line of code. So now if I save the script, it won't compile because this line here is being ignored, and every script must have at least one output function call. And so now this line of code is being ignored and treated like these lines of code. So this is handy for commenting out lines of code that you want to keep, but perhaps you're trying to troubleshoot, work out a bug, work out some sort of issue with your code, and you want to keep the code there. You don't want to delete it and lose it, but you also don't want Pine Script to be executing it. So that's great for isolating issues in your scripts and things like that. You can also put comments after a line of code. So at the end of this line of code, we could move this comment to after the line of code. And now this will also compile. It's really a matter of preference whether you comment before the line of code or on the line of code. And it obviously depends on how long the line of code is, whether or not you can do this, because it may be off your screen. So that's all you really need to know about comments. That's how they function. That's all you need to know in order to use them. But why would you comment your code? What's the point? Well, if I put on a complicated script I've made in the past, such as my relative volume by time of day script, and I open up the source code to this script, you can see that it's quite complicated. It has a lot of lines of code here, 139 lines of code, and some of it can look fairly confusing to the human eye. So what I've done is lace the code, this script, with comments so that each section of code is explained so that I know what I'm trying to achieve with that line of code, and anyone else who looks through my source code can see what I was trying to do, and it can help to make the source code make more sense. So sometimes the code's not that obvious. Here it's a little bit obvious because average volume, AVG stands for average volume, and we're dividing the total volume by the lookback period. But by adding this line of code here that says calculate average volume for this bar, that can just help make sense of this line of code at a glance without having to think through what exactly I was trying to do with this line of code. So that's the purpose of comments, and that's how to use them. It's not very complicated, but it's a great habit to get into early on in your coding, to comment your code so that you know what you're trying to do, because at some point you're going to save the script, close your charts, and you won't come back to the script for several weeks or even months. And if you don't comment your code extensively, then there's a good chance that you will forget what the code is doing, and you'll spend hours trying to reverse engineer what the code does before you can continue working on it or improving it. So that's it for this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. So hey coders, welcome to the very first Pine Script coding lesson in this course. This lesson is going to cover the study annotation function, which is this guy down here. So I'm going to explain what this does and how to use it and what all the input parameters do. So this study function is what Pine Script refers to as a annotation function. So similar to this as an annotation comment, which tells it's a compiler directive. It tells the Pine Script compiler what version of Pine Script we're using, in this case version 4, the latest version as of making this course. The study function does a similar thing. It tells Pine Script all of the code that follows this study annotation function is to be treated as a study script, or in other words, an indicator script, as opposed to a strategy script. So if we were to make a strategy script, we would have access to different functions, such as all these strategy calls. But we're not doing that today. We're going to cover strategy much later in the course. So today we're just working with the study function. So first of all, what inputs does the study annotation function take? It takes two titles. It takes an overlay Boolean input. It takes a text format input. It takes a precision input, a scale input, and a max bars back input. So those are the parameters we have to work with, and I'll explain what each of them do one by one. So the first input parameter is a title, and this is the only input parameter that is required. So if you don't have this title and you try to save your script, it won't work. We'll get an error. So this first title input is the name of the script, and you can call it whatever you want. So in this case, I'm going to call it Pine Script Mastery Course Study Example and hit save. And you'll see up here, our script name is now changed to PSMC Study Example. Now you don't need to have the title equals here. We could just do that and that would also work. But just for clarity's sake, I'm going to leave that in because we also have access to the short title. So I'll show what that does now. Short title is set to, let's call this study. And now if I hit save, that'll change the name of our script to just study. And so the reason there's two titles is that the main title is for explaining in detail what your script name is. The short title is for an abbreviation on your chart. So for example, I have an indicator called the ultimate pullback indicator, but that's a long name to have. It clutters up your chart a fair bit. So what I've used the short title for is to abbreviate it to UPI. And so when you use my ultimate pullback indicator, that's all you get on your chart is UPI. So that's the purpose of the short title, is to abbreviate any long script names you come up with. So that's those two input parameters. The next input parameter is overlay. So by default, overlay is set to false. And what this means is that our script will draw into its own window pane, its own box. As you can see here, it's drawing in its own oscillator type box. So this is useful for scripts like the RSI, stochastics, even volume, that sort of thing. But if you want to draw onto your actual chart, you have to set this to true. So if I set this to true and I hit save, first of all, I need to remove the script for this parameter to update. And if we click add to chart, the script is now drawing the closing price to the chart instead of into its own oscillator box. So I hit save again. And I remove the script, add it back. Now it's in its own box. So that's what the overlay parameter does. The next input is the format input. So this is for setting how the number values are formatted when they're drawn to your chart. So we only have two formatting options. If you type format.control space, technically three, inherit, price, and volume. By default, it's set to inherit, which will inherit your chart axis formatting, but you can override this with whichever formatting type you want. So if we set this to format.volume and hit save, you can see that it's now drawing a 1 down here. If I change this to say 20,000, hit save, you can see that it now puts a K on the end. And if we were to change this to say 20,420, and we hit save, now it says 20.42K. That's useful for creating indicators like a volume indicator or anything that works with volume, that sort of thing. Because if you set this to price and hit save, then we'll get the exact number there. So for most scripts, you're going to want this exact number, but for other scripts, especially ones working with volume, this formatting volume format can be helpful. So I'll leave this as inherit for now. So if I set this back to plot the closing price and we move on, I will show you what the next input does, which is precision. So the next input parameter is precision, and this specifies how much precision to go into with your decimal values. So if you were to set this to 2, it's going to cut all these decimal digits in the indicator value, and it's going to round the number up to the nearest 2 digits. So if I hit save, you'll see that this number will just become 0.69. And then as it gets closer to 70, it rounds up to 70 there. So we only have 2 decimal digits, and that's what precision does. We go all the way to 1, and then we'll just get 0.7 because it's rounding up 0.69 to 7. So for most instruments on your chart, most markets, precision of 5 is about as much as you will ever need, but you can go higher if you want to. We could go to 6. I'm not sure what the maximum precision is, but it's a lot. There we have a precision of 10. That might be helpful for analyzing cryptocurrency markets, maybe like Satoshis on some cryptocurrency markets. But by default, this is set to whatever your price axis is. So I'll leave that as 5 for now, and we'll move on to the next input parameter, which is scale. Now this parameter tells Pine Script which scale to attach your indicator values to. So we have a number of options here. By default, it's set to your main price scale. But if I type in scale and then control space, that'll bring up the list of scales we have to choose from. So if I set the scale to scale.left and I save the chart, save the script, and I remove the script from my chart, add it back on, now you can see that the indicator values are plotting to the left scale. So that's what this input parameter does. It allows you to move which scale that your indicator value is attached to. So the final input parameter we can work with is max bars back. So if you type in max underscore bars underscore back, this determines how far back your script can reference historical bars. So if I set this to 5, now our script can only reference the past 5 historical bars. So that will be the maximum amount of historical values we can go back. So it's very unlikely you will ever have to use this input parameter. I'm not even sure why it's included, but I'm sure there's a reason for it. Maybe for saving the amount of memory that a script uses when calculating its values. If your script is failing to execute because it's running into Pine Script's computer resource limitations, maybe you will use this feature. But that is all of the study annotation input parameters we have to work with. For your average indicator, you will only really be working with these 3 values: your main title, your short title, and overlay. That's the most common 3 inputs I use in my own scripts anyway. So that's it for this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Hey coders, welcome to the plot function lesson. So in this lesson, I'm going to explain the plot function in great detail and explain what all of these input arguments do and how to use them in your own scripts. So for this demonstration, I'm going to leave overlay to false so that we have our own indicator box here. That'll make it easier to see what is happening to this line as we manipulate it. So as always, if you hover your mouse over the plot function name, you'll get a list of the possible input variables. Here we have 13 input variables. I'll explain what they all do one by one. And if by the end of this lesson you still have questions, then just simply hold Control or Command and click on the function name and you'll get a full description of what this function does. Now the plot function only has one required input, meaning that we only have to give it one value before it'll work. All of the other input variables are optional, and the required input is a series. So this could be an open, close, high, low, or any other series of price variables. So you could also plot indicator values. So here we have an EMA, 50 EMA. We can plot that to the chart as well if we want to, like so. So let's go over the other input variables. The next one we have to work with is title. So this is the title of the plot. I hit save. I come up to the options menu. You can see that it is now being renamed to this is the title, and we can change the color of it and the style of the plot. So you could change it to an area, histogram, circles, whatever you'd like. So I'm going to leave this title variable in while we go over the next few input variables, just so that we can see it in the settings menu when we go up to adjust things. So the next optional input we have is a color. So if you type in color equals and then type color full stop and then control space, here is the list of colors you can choose from. So we could change it to purple if you wanted to, hit save, and it will change the color of our line. The next option we have is the line width. So if I type in line width equals, And we could set this to, by default, this is set to 1. So if I hit save, this won't change. But you can change this all the way up to 4. And the higher you go, the thicker the line will be. So the next input variable is style. So if you type in style and then plot dot control space, here is a list of styles we can choose from. Now this is the same list you'll get from this formatting dialog here. So there's a bunch of different styles you can choose from. For example, we could turn this into a columns indicator. If we hit save, this will now be drawn as columns, just like a volume indicator or something like that. And so I'm not going to go through all of these, but if you get time, you can come in here and play around with these different formatting styles and see what you prefer for whatever you're working on. The next optional input variable is whether or not to track the price. So if we type track price, if you set this to true and hit save, you can see that it now draws a horizontal price line at the last value. The next input variable is transparency. So if you type in trans and you set this to say 50, then the line will be 50% transparent. As you can see, this does not affect the horizontal track price line. The next input variable we can choose from is hist base, which is short for histogram base. So if we type in hist base, this will be the base price that our columns and histograms draw from. So if we set this to say 0.68 cents and change our plot style to columns, we save the script, you can see that the histogram base is now 68 cents. And whenever price goes below it, the columns are drawn to the downside. And whenever price is above it, it's drawn to the upside. So I'm going to start a new line here so that we don't go off the page. And the next input variable we can work with is called offset. Now offset tells Pine Script how many bars to shift the current plot left or right. So a negative value will shift it to the left and a positive value will shift it to the right. So if we wanted to shift this current closing price plot back 10 bars, then we'd simply type in -10, hit save, and then this plot should move back 10 bars. Like so. If you wanted to move it 10 bars forward, just put in a positive value, in this case +10, hit save, and it will now draw at the end of the chart here. And you can go as far back as -9999, and that will shift the plot all the way to the start of the chart. And now all we have on our chart is our horizontal price line. I'll set this to 0 for now, and we'll continue onwards. The next input variable is called join, and it's a Boolean. So if we, by default, this is set to false, but if we set this to true, it will now join any plotted shapes we have on our chart. So this only works with the style cross and style circles. So if we type in here style_cross and hit save, you can see it now draws a line connecting all of these crosses. If we change this to circles, it will also draw a line connecting all of these circles. So I'll set this back to a line and set this to false. And we'll go over the next input variable, which is editable. Editable tells Pine Script whether or not the user can adjust the formatting settings for this plotted line. By default, this is set to true. So if you come up into the settings menu, you can change the style of the plot and the color. But if we set this to false and save the script, now there is no settings option at all, because we cannot change the, now we cannot edit the plot style or color. So I'll change this back to true, and we'll go over the next input variable, which is show_last. Now by default, this input argument isn't used, but what it does is it tells Pine Script how many bars back to draw this plot. So if we set this to 10 and hit save, it only plots our line over the past 10 bars, and anything beyond that is not plotted to the chart. So I'll change this to say 100, save it, and you can see it draws back over the past 100 bars. Now the final input argument is called display. Now there's only two options we can choose from here, and that is display.all or none. If we hit none, then this plot will not be drawn to the chart. We still get the number in the top left here, but the line itself is not drawn to our chart. If we change this back to all, then it will come back onto our chart. And another way of achieving this is to just set the transparency to 100%. If we hit save, has the same effect, except now we have our horizontal price line being drawn to the chart. Whereas display.none removes all of our drawings, all of our plotting. So this is useful for plotting graphical information to the chart that you don't want the user to see, but you want to be able to read the value up here next to the indicator name. So that brings us to the end of the plot lesson. And hopefully now you have a firm understanding of all the different variables you can work with when plotting data to your chart. I'll see you in the next lesson. Welcome to the data types lesson. This lesson will show you the fundamental data types that we work with in Pine Script, which will be the core of your scripts and your calculations. So the first data type, the most common data type you'll be working with, is integer and also float. So integer type is just a whole number like 1, 10, 100, 20, whatever. Just any number that does not have a decimal place after it. So here we'll just declare it as 1. Keep things simple. The next data type is called a float type, which is short for floating point number, which is just any number that has a decimal in it. If we type here float type and I assign this to 0.5, this is a valid float number. And the most common floating point numbers you'll be using are things like price data. So right now, the closing price of this market is 1.52652. That's a floating point number. So you'll be using floating points a lot. The next data type isn't really a data type of its own. I'm just going to show you how you can use a mathematical operator on your floating type variable. So here I'm going to declare a new variable 0.1. And if you use the letter E, and then let's say 2, this is saying multiply 1 by 10 to the power of 2. That's what this little E symbol means. And it's not often you'll need to use this, if ever, but it's important to point out that you can use this if you need to in whatever scripts you're creating. So if we plot this to the chart, we will get a 10 plotted onto the chart because 0.1 times 10 to the power of 2 is 10. Anyway, moving on to our Boolean type. So a Boolean type is like a switch. It's like on, off, true, false, yes, no. In this case, I'm going to set it to false, but you could also set it to true. Those are the only two options you have when working with a Boolean data type. So I'll call it false for now. The next common data type is the color type. So with this, you could use hexadecimal code. So this 00FF00 would plot bright green to the chart. You can also include another 2 digits to make this hexadecimal code include transparency or opacity. But I don't often use that because most drawing functions have an inbuilt transparency parameter, which makes it a lot easier to work with hexadecimal colors. If you're not sure what hexadecimal colors are, there's a separate lesson on that. But as always, Pine Script has made using colors easier than any other programming language I've ever worked with. And all you need to do in order to use their inbuilt colors is type color.control space, and you'll get a list of all the inbuilt colors here. And so for this example, I'm going to set it to color.red. And you'll know you found a valid color by the text turning red. That means that we're referencing an inbuilt variable. So the final standard fundamental data type we can work with is a string type. So a string type is just any kind of text, any string of characters. It's not often that you'll be working with string types in your scripts, but there are a few use cases for this, such as referencing market names and brokers and stuff like that. So these are the main fundamental basic data types you will be working with the most in your Pine Script code. Integer whole numbers, floating point numbers, booleans, colors, and strings from time to time. So let me just show you how to plot each of these data types to the chart. So first we're going to plot integer type, and I'll give it the color that we created here of color type. So color is set to color type, just to show you how to reference these variables in your scripts in a practical manner. So the next one is plot float type, and I'll give this a color of color.aqua. Then we have float type E, which I'll give a color of color.black. Then we have the Boolean type. Now you can't plot Booleans straight to your chart because it's a true or false value, and Pine Script doesn't know how to interpret that when drawing it onto your chart. So the easiest way to plot a Boolean to your chart is to use 1 for true or 0 for false. And the quickest way to achieve that is to use what's called a conditional operator. And there's a separate lesson on this if you're not sure what this is. But basically, if I type a question mark and then I type a 1 and then a colon and a 0, this is saying if the Boolean type is set to true, plot a 1 to the chart. If it's set to false, plot a 0. And I'll change this to say 2 so that we can see them all separately plotted onto our chart when the time comes. And so if I set this to, let's say, color.blue, and that'll do. It's very difficult to plot a string to the chart, but I'm sure you get the idea. I don't need to plot this to the chart. That'll just make this lesson more complicated than it needs to be. And in future lessons, I'll be showing you how to interact with the string type anyway. But this is how you would plot these main number and color variables and Boolean types to your chart. If I save the script now and I add it to my chart, you'll see we're getting them all these different colors plotted. So we have our integer in red, which is a 2. We have our floating point is a 0.5 in aqua, which is here. We have our floating point times 10 to the power of 2 with this little E operator down here. That's up here in black, the 10 in black. And then we have our Boolean value in blue, which is plotting a 1 or a 0 based on whether this Boolean is true. You can see it's plotting a 0 because we set the Boolean to false. If I set this back to true, save the script, we'll now get a 1 plotted in blue. And so that's it for this lesson. That's how you interact with the basic fundamental data types in Pine Script. We'll be covering these in great detail in future lessons, so don't worry if some of this didn't make sense. I hope you found this helpful. If not, leave a question in the comments section, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Hey coders, welcome to the price series lesson. This is going to be a brief overview of how to access a candle's high, low, close, and open. So I'm going to show you how to create your own variables that reference this price data. And then we'll draw it to the chart. So this will be a very simple lesson just to introduce you to how to access your price data in your scripts. So the first thing we're going to do is get the price data. So we're going to have a candle open. And by using this equal sign, we're saying set this variable to the open price. Very simple. The next one is candle close. So we're setting the candle close variable to the closing price. Next one is candle high, is set to the candle high. And the last one is candle low, is set to this bar's low. And we hit save, the script will compile, and we now have our 4 price action variables. Now this is the heart of every script. By accessing this information, you can detect all kinds of price action setups and patterns in the markets. So the next thing we're going to do is draw these values to the chart. So we do this by using the plot function. And if you're unfamiliar with this function, you're not sure what it does, then go and check out the plot function lesson that explains this function in detail. So I'm going to keep it simple today. We're just going to plot these values in different colors. That's all we're doing. So this first one is going to be plot the candle open, and I'm going to set it to the color red. The next plot we're going to draw to the chart is the candle close. We're going to set this to color.blue. The next variable we're going to plot to the chart is the candle high. And we're going to set the color to orange. And now after each input you put into a function, you separate them by using a comma. I'm not sure if I've explained that yet, but that should be pretty self-explanatory and obvious to you. But I thought I'd better mention it, just in case there's any complete beginners out there who are confused about how this works. But I'm separating each input variable with a comma. So the last one is candle low. Candle low, and we'll set this to orange as well, because it will just make more sense when it's drawing to our chart. So if I hit save now and I hit add to chart, this script will now be drawing to our chart. You can see that the orange line at the top is the candle high, the orange line at the bottom is the candle low, and the red and blue line in the middle is the open and closing price of each candle. So that's the basics of accessing your price data in Pine Script. Very, very simple. It's a huge advantage of Pine Script. It's just how easy it is to get this data. And then you can perform all kinds of calculations on it. You could, for example, candle size equals high minus low. We could plot this somewhere in here. Candle size, color is color.black. Hit save, minimize this. And now you can see all the way down the bottom here, the candle size is being drawn in pips. So the size of this current candle is 9.3 pips. If I draw that out, it's hard to get it accurate with the mouse, but it is exactly 9.3 pips, this candle size right now. So in future lessons, I'll show more advanced ways of using this information to detect things like candlestick patterns and all sorts of fun stuff like that. But for now, I'm just going to keep it as simple as possible. The next thing I wanted to show you in this lesson is how to access historical bars. So by using these values here, each time this script is calculated on a bar, it's accessing the information for that bar. So if I hover my mouse over this bar here, you can see I'm getting the open, close, high, and low of this bar here drawn to my chart. And this bar here was 58 pips in size. So what if I wanted to compare the current candle to this candle all the way back here? Well, a rudimentary example I'll show you right now. So if you hold shift and click on this bar, and you can see it says 0 bars there. So this is the current bar that we're on. If we go back 1, it says -1, -2, etc. If we go all the way back to this bar here, it'll say -21. So this bar is 21 bars back from the current bar. And let's say I want to compare the current bar's size to this bar for whatever reason. I'll show you how to achieve that in this lesson. So if we say candle size 21 for 21 bars ago, we can write here high, open square bracket is how we access historical data. And then all we need to do is put in the bar index in relation to the current bar. So the current bar is 0. If I put 0 in there, that is exactly the same as just writing high, because it's accessing the high of the bar with the index from the current bar of 0, which means the current bar. So if we change this to 21, that's going to get the candle high from 21 bars ago, which is this bar here. So if I write high in square brackets 21, it's very important that you use square brackets and not curved brackets or any other kind of bracket, because according to Pine Script syntax, that's how it knows what you're trying to do. If you change the type of bracket, it won't know what you're trying to achieve with these brackets. But square brackets are for accessing historical series. So if I minus the high of 21 bars ago with the low from 21 bars ago, and we plot it to our chart, 21, say we change the color to color.purple, and we hit save, you can see there it says 58 pips. So the current bar's candle size in pips is 9.4, which is here in black. And the candle size of 21 bars ago is 58 pips. And if I hover my mouse over this bar from 21 bars ago, you can see that the black number, the current size, changes to 58 pips. And now the purple line is showing the candle size from 21 bars back from that bar. So if we go all the way back here, you can see that that says 23.5 pips in black. If I hover my mouse over there, the purple value says 23.5 pips. So that's drawing the candle size from 21 bars ago. So that's how price series works. And this works for anything that references historical bars. So any indicator, RSI, EMA, etc. So if you had the ATR value, ATR of a 14 length period, you could access the ATR for 21 bars ago using the same price series. So if I wanted to draw the ATR of 21 bars ago, I just write it out like that. 21 in square brackets is referencing the ATR value from 21 bars ago. color can be color.green. Hit save. The script will compile, and it is now drawing the ATR value from 21 bars ago. So that's how price series works. That's how you access information from historical bars. This applies to all indicators, all price action variables, including volume. So we could just as easily change this to say volume from 21 bars ago, hit save, and we're now drawing the amount of volume that was printed to the chart from 21 bars ago. So that's how you manipulate and access historical bar values in Pine Script. It's very simple, very easy to do. And in future lessons, we'll use this information to detect complex candlestick patterns and perform various forms of analysis. So that brings me to the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. So in this lesson, I'm going to explain variables and how to declare them and manipulate them. So variables are defined by what's called an identifier. And an identifier is just a tag, a word, that you use to reference the value that you assign the variable. If you wanted to create, say, a variable that counts green candles on the charts, you could call your variable green candle count. And now this is a valid identifier. Now, identifiers cannot include any special characters, so you can't put any hashtags or brackets or any of that sort of thing in your identifier. It has to be letters or digits. So you could put a 1 on the end, or you could put a number anywhere in the identifier, but the identifier cannot start with a digit. So if you put a number at the beginning of the variable, and we save the script, we'll get an error, because Pine Script is interpreting this as a value before it sees it as a variable. So if I remove that, save the script will now compile without errors. So in order to assign a variable a value, you need to use just one equals sign. So this will initiate the green candle count variable with a value of 0. And this will set green candle count to the data type integer, which are whole numbers. If I set this to 0.1, then this would become a float. And I'm not going to go over all the different types you can assign variables to in this lesson, because there's a separate lesson for that. I'm going to change this back to a 0 for an integer, since we're going to use this variable to count the green candles on our chart. So now I'm going to show you how to use an if function in order to increase this green candle count as the script detects bullish candles on the chart. Now, if you don't understand any of this or how this if function works, don't worry, there's another lesson that covers it in great detail. But just for today's example, just to show you how you can manipulate variables, I'm just going to use this very rudimentary example. So first we need to detect if the closing price is higher than the opening price. That's the definition of a bullish candle. And then I'm going to increment or increase this green candle count by 1. So in order to do that, you cannot use just a single equals sign to change the value of an existing variable. Once a variable has been created, you need to use what's called the assign operator, which is a colon and then an equals. So this is initiating the variable, and you need to use this format when you're using the variable for the very first time in your script. But once you've declared the variable, you then need to use the assign operator in order to manipulate its value. So right now it's set to 0, and we want to add 1 to whatever this value is. So we're going to say green candle count plus 1. And there's another lesson on all the different mathematical arithmetic operators. So I'm not going to go into detail about them either. But this is how you would add the value of 1 to the green candle count variable. So now if I change this plot to plot the green candle count, I save the script, add it to the chart. See, it's only going to plot 1 on each bar that is bullish. So if a bar is bearish, it plots 0. And if a bar is bullish, it plots 1. That's because of the way Pine Script executes these scripts. So all of this code is executed repeatedly on each new historical bar. What that means is that this green candle count is being lost on every new bar that this script runs on, because it's being set back to 0 and the whole variable is being created again. So there are a couple of ways you can store this green count variable across all of your historical bars as the script executes. The easiest way that we can do this in Pine Script, as of version 4, you can just put the 3-letter tag in front of this variable of VAR. If you type VAR and then a space, what this will tell Pine Script is that this variable, green candle count, is only to be initiated once. So on the very first bar that this script runs on, it'll create the green candle count variable with a value of 0, and it will never do this again. So on each successive historical bar, it's going to keep this value, and so whatever we do to it on the next bar will be saved across all the bars. So now if I save the script, we'll get a total count of just how many green bars were plotted from the very first historical bar the script ran on all the way up to the current bar. So we had 7,375 green candles that this script detected from the very first bar it ran on. Now there is a limitation to how far back Pine Script can run, but it's quite high. And if we wanted to know exactly how many, you could just change this to say total candle count, change all of these variables and get rid of this if clause. And now it's going to count every bar that it runs on. So if I save the script, you can see that it ran on 14,881 historical bars. So that's all you really need to know about variables, how to declare them, how to use identifiers. Remember, they can't start with a digit. They can start with an underscore, but that is the only special character that you can use to declare your variables with. Those are the 3 things that you really need to remember, that your variable identifiers cannot start with a digit. They can have numbers in them and underscores. Once they're assigned, if you do not use this var operator, this VAR operator to identify this variable as a variable that should only be initiated once, then it will be reinitialized on every historical bar, so that if we save this, it will now say 1, because it's only executing on 1 bar, and then Pine Script is wiping the stored value and setting it back to 0 each time. So that's the second thing to remember. The third thing to remember is that if you want to assign an existing variable to a new value, you need to use the assign operator, which is a colon and then an equals. And one last thing to note is that you can also not set a variable to an existing variable name. So you can see here that high is an inbuilt variable that references the candle's high price. If you were to try to use that in your own script as your own variable, the script will compile, but it does get very confusing to use inbuilt variables for your own variables. For one thing, you'll know if you're using an existing variable by the color coding. Every inbuilt function or variable or operator in Pine Script has a color code. So all your variables will be white in text. Any existing variables will be red or some shade of blue. So that's the easiest way to know if you're using an existing variable name. And that's it for this lesson. See you in the next one. So welcome to the fill lesson. In this lesson, I'll show you how to use the fill function in order to fill the background color of your chart between 2 values. Now the fill function allows you to use up to 7 input arguments, but it requires at least 2 plot arguments or horizontal line arguments. I'll explain that right now. So the first thing we need to do is define our initial plot. So in this case, I'm going to call it H for high. And we need to define our second plot value. So I'm going to call mine L for low. So now if I hit save, we'll be drawing the high and the low of price to our chart. And I'm going to show you how to fill a background color between these 2 lines. So now if we write in fill here, and again, if you hover your mouse over this function, it'll tell you the inputs it takes. And there's 2 options here. We can work with plot or H line, which is short for horizontal line. First, I'll show you how to use plot, and then we'll go over horizontal line. So in order to plot between these 2 values, we need to write in H for high, and then L for low. And we'll change the color to color.red. If we hit save, we've now changed the background color of the chart between these 2 values to red. And just like the plot function, we can also change the title. And now if I hit save and come up to the settings menu, here's our fill, and we can change the color and the opacity or transparency. I've already shown you the color input. So the next input value is transparency. So if you type in trans, set this to say 0, and we hit save, it'll now be a solid red color. The next input variable is editable. So if we set this to false, now we will not be able to come up to the settings menu and change our fill color or transparency. The only variables we can adjust now are the plot, the 2 plot lines. So if we turn them off, we now have a solid colored fill on our charts, which actually looks pretty cool. Looks like some sort of artistic drawing. And when we're working with the fill function using 2 plots, we also get access to one more input variable that's not available if these were H lines, horizontal lines. And that variable is the show last variable. So exactly the same as the plot function. If we type in here, say show last equals 50, then that will only show this fill color over the past 50 bars. So if I zoom out the chart a little bit, it'll stop plotting back here. If we hit save, there you go. It's only filling back 50 bars. It's still plotting the lines that we have here over historical price action. But if we wanted to have this consistent with the fill function, we just type in the same thing here. So show last equals 50, show last equals 50. If we hit save, then all of this drawing will stop at 50 bars back. So now I'll show you how to use the H line option. So let me first delete these two, and we'll call this one H line 1 is set to H line, and we'll set this to 0.70. So that's going to set our horizontal line to 70 cents. Then we'll declare H line 2, and this will also be a H line, and we'll set this to 0.69, so 69 cents. And now we have our 2 H line values. So now if we change the fill function to reference these 2 values, and we hit save, you can see we have an error here. So you can't just fill 2 colors between the charts. You actually have to plot something to the chart. So here I'm going to use plot close, and I'm going to set display to display.none. If we hit save, that should fix the error. There we go. And now we're filling a red color between 70 cents and 69 cents as a horizontal line. So I've come up into the settings menu here. Well, first of all, let me change this back to true. And then if we come up to the settings menu and we turn fill off, you can see we have a horizontal line being drawn at 69 cents and a horizontal line being drawn at 70 cents. And then our fill is just filling in the color between those 2 horizontal lines. That brings me to the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one.
Alright, so welcome to one of the most important lessons in this basic series. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to get all of the different data type user inputs. I'm not going to show you how to manipulate them or use them in this lesson because there's quite a few and some of them are quite complex to work with. But I wanted to keep this lesson concise because I feel like it's a good idea to have all of this information in one place for you. And later down the line, when you're making more complex scripts, you can reference this lesson to know how to get exactly the type of user input that you need. So first of all, there are 8 different data types that you can request from the user. And by that, I mean different inputs you can provide in your settings menu. I'm going to go over all of them in today's lesson, and then I'll show you how to manipulate each of them in a different lesson. So the first data type I'm going to show you how to work with is a Boolean value. We're going to get a Boolean input value. And I'm going to call this input variable input Boolean. And it's going to be set to the input annotation function is the official name for this. And it's just an input function that's going to add the capability to change this value in the settings menu. So if you hover your mouse over the input function, it will tell you all of the different input parameters that it can take. And I'm going to walk you through each of these. So for a Boolean input, it's quite simple to set up. We need to title the input first of all. So I'm going to call this on/off. And it's going to be set to the type of, and so now if you type input dot and then press Control space, it will bring up the list of inputs you can choose from. So we're going with bool here. So we click bool, which is short for Boolean. So an input Boolean takes a minimum of 3 input parameters. So we've set our title, we've set the data type to bool. Now we have to give it a default value. So DEFVAL, defval, is short for default value. And we need to tell Pine Script what to set this input Boolean to by default. And so in this case, I'm going to set it to true. And now if we hit save and add to our chart, we're now plotting the closing price to our chart. But if we come up to the settings menu here, we have our on-off input. We can turn that on or off by clicking on it, and that will change this checkmark box. So if I turn this off, hit OK, now this input Boolean is set to false. And if we reference this input variable anywhere else in our script, it will now be turned to false instead of true. And that's it for an input Boolean. The input Boolean is really easy to work with. So let's move on to the next input type, which will be integer, which is just another word for whole number. So I'll type in here, get an integer input value, and we'll call this variable input integer. And it's set to the input function. It's going to be titled whole number. Its type is going to be input dot integer. Now the integer input type can take several different input parameters. So we can set the default value. We'll set this one to 7. You can set the minimum value. So if you type minval, that will set the lowest point that the user can change this input setting to. So here we'll set it to -10. And we can set the max value or max val. In this example, I'm going to set it to +10. So now if I hit save and come up to the settings menu, we now have a new input setting, whole number. And we can change this all the way up to 10, and it will not go beyond 10. If I type in 99, it'll just change it to 9. And -10 is our minimum value. It's as low as we can go. But there's a couple more options we can add if we want to. We could set the step of this. So if I set this to step equals 2 and we hit save, I come up to the settings menu. Now, whenever I click the up or down arrow, it's going to add or minus 2 to this number. So if I hit up, it goes to 9. And if I hit up now, it won't go to 10 because it's trying to set this to 11. If I go down, it'll go to 7, 5, 3, 1, -1, -3, -5, and -7. So you can see it's changing in steps of 2. If I change this to 5, and I change the default value to 5, hit save. Now when I hit the up arrow, it's going to go to 10. When I hit the down arrow twice, it'll go to 0. So that's changing this value in a step of 5. The next input parameter we can use is options. So if I type in here, options is set to, and then we open 2 square brackets for our series or list, I can now define a set of options that the user can choose from. So if I set the options to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I hit save, the script will compile, come up to the settings menu, and now we can choose our value from this drop-down box of options. And notice we cannot change this value anymore using our keyboard. We can only select from the options that we have provided the user, which means that our step input parameter is no longer relevant. And one other important thing to note with this is that you cannot set a default value outside of your set options. So if I change this back to 7 and hit save, we will get an error down here. As you can see here, 7 is not in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is our options. Those are all the different input parameters you can use for integer inputs. And this should cover all of your needs when making any type of script that uses integers. So the next input type we're going to cover here is a float. Get a float input value. And we're going to call this input float. It's going to be assigned to the input function. It's going to have a title of decimal number. It's going to have a type of input.float. And in this example, we're going to set the default value to -0.5. If I hit save, this will now add a new input variable to our settings menu. And if you don't set a minimum value or a maximum value, then you can set this to whatever you want. And there's no limitation. But if you do want to set a minimum value and a maximum value, you can do so. So if we type in here, minimum value is set to negative 3.14. Notice we can use decimals now because this is a floating point number. We can set the max val to 3.14 and positive 3.14 is our maximum value. We can set the step to 0.2. And if we hit save, that will set up our input parameter with these settings. So if we go up to the options menu, we can now change this by a step of 0.2. And we can go all the way up to 3.1. But I can type in a 4 on the end there, hit OK. And now we have our maximum floating point input value set there. You can also use the options setting here. So if I replace this step with options is set to say 0.0, negative 10.5, and negative 0.5. We close that off, hit save. We can now come up to the settings menu and we have a drop down box just like the whole number input. And we can only choose from the input options that we defined here. So those are the only input parameters we can work with integer and float. And that should cover all of your needs in all of your various scripts. So the next input type we can work with is symbol. So symbol is basically your market, a market ticker, any instrument. So here we're on Canadian dollar against the Swiss franc. If you wanted to change what data your script is referencing, you can use a symbol input to achieve that. So here we're going to say get a symbol input value. So we're going to create a new variable here called input symbol. It's going to be assigned to the input function. We're going to give it a title of symbol, and it's going to be a type of input.symbol. And the symbol input function is similar to the Boolean input function in that it requires a default value before your script will compile. The default value takes a text input because this is a ticker, and you can reference any market here. So the format is, first you need to set the exchange, and the second value is your ticker ID. So for example, if I wanted to access the Australian dollar against the US dollar, I would type in here an exchange name. So in my case, I use OANDA. So I'll type in OANDA, AUD/USD. If I hit save, the script will compile. And now my script can access data from OANDA, Australian dollar versus US dollar. So you could also change this to something like the BATS exchange and access Apple stock value. Hit save, come up to the settings menu, and we're now referencing Apple's stock price. You could also change this to SPY, hit save, come up to the settings menu, and we're now referencing the SPY ETF. So those are the only input parameters we have to work with when it comes to symbol inputs. You can only set the default symbol. You cannot use options like you can on these other input types. And so the user can type in whatever symbol they want into this input setting. So let's move on to the next input type, which is resolution or time frame. So here I'm going to say get a resolution input value, and we're going to call this input value input resolution. It's going to be set to the input function like all the others. It's going to have a title of resolution, and it's going to have a type of input.resolution. Now it also requires a default value. So here I'm going to give it a default value of 60, and this number is in minutes. So if I hit save, the script will compile, and now we have a new input variable of resolution. And this resolution comes as a drop-down box in the most common denominations. So 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute, and so on, all the way up to the monthly chart. So this is a useful input if your script accesses data from other timeframes. And I'll show you how to do that in other lessons. So that's how you would access other symbols and other timeframes. Let's move on to the next input function type, which is session or time zone. So here we're going to get a session input value, and it's going to be called input session. It's going to be set to the input function with the title of session, a type of input dot session, and its default value is going to be a string input, and it's going to be set to 24x7 or 24/7. If I hit save, the script will compile, and we now have a new option up here where we can choose and select from 2 different times, and that will give us a time session. So if I set this to 1 a.m. and I set this one to 3 a.m., hit OK. Now we could use this input session variable to check something that our script is doing to see if that something is occurring within a certain time zone. So this would be helpful for something like detecting trading sessions, market opens, market closes, and that sort of thing. You could also change the default value to reference these sorts of numbers. So we could say 0100-0300. If we hit save, that will give us the same settings as we put in manually. You could change this to anything. So we could change this to 0300 and change this to 1300. Hit save, and there you go. You're referencing between 3 a.m. to 1 p.m. So this is in 24-hour time. And so that's it for the session input value. Let's move on to the final input data type we can choose from, which is source. So we're going to get a source input value, and it's going to be called input source. It's assigned to the input. We're going to call it source. It's going to be of type input dot source, and its default value is going to be a close price. So source is a price action source. It's a high, a low, a close, or an open. If I hit save here, and we'll now have a new input variable called source with a drop-down box of all the different source options. So here we have our candle open price, high, low, and closing price. And then we also have the high and low, the high, low, close, and the open, high, low, close. So these values here are a little bit more exotic, and they're for specific use cases, whereas these 4 here are your more traditional inputs for things like calculating an RSI, an EMA, or that sort of thing. So for example, say you wanted a RSI to be able to be calculated on the opening price instead of the closing price, you could use a source input to achieve that. And I just realized I lied. This was not the last input type. There's one more input type. The 8th input type we can use is a string input. So in this case, we're going to get a string input value. It's going to be called input string. It's going to be set to input with the title of string, a type of input dot string, and a default value of, let's just say, text. If I hit save here, the script will compile, and now at the bottom of our settings menu, we have a new input type of text, and we can change this to whatever we like. Hit OK, and you can see that our input string variable has now changed to whatever we want to put in here. The most common way you would use this is to create options. So here we can also create an options menu where we give the user a set of options to choose from. So we could say A, B, and C. Choose from any of these 3 options. If we hit save, we come up to open our settings menu again. Our string input has now turned into a drop-down box input. So we could choose from A, B, or C. I'm not going to go over the various use cases for this particular input or any of these inputs in this lesson because this lesson will be far too long. I'm going to break down each data type itself in its own lesson. So that brings me to the end of the input lesson. Here is all the code we have written. As always, if you have any questions about any of these, leave them in the comments section and I'll respond as soon as I can. Otherwise, I will see you in the next lesson.
Hi traders, welcome to the alert condition function lesson. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can add alert condition functionality to any script that you write, or any existing script that you find that doesn't already have alert functionality. So let's open up a blank script here. And to keep things simple, for today's lesson, we're just going to identify higher high, higher close candles and lower low, lower close candles. So for a higher high, high close, we just need the closing price to be greater than the previous candle's high. And for a lower low, lower close, we just need it to be lower than the previous candle's low. So these are the two conditions that we are going to use in our lesson today. So if I save the script, add this to my chart. So we're just going to plot the closing price. It's not important what we plot here. We're just going to focus on the alert condition function. So in order to add alert functionality to your script and make it possible to select your script from this condition box, you need to have an alert condition function call in your script. And this function takes 3 input parameters or arguments. A condition, which is a Boolean variable. It takes a title, which is a string variable, and a message, which is also a string variable. So the condition is whichever condition you want to trigger the alert, and the title is what shows up on your screen when the alert is triggered, or the subject of your email if you get email alerts, and the message is the body of the message text. So for this example, we're going to first trigger an alert for higher high, higher close candles. So to do that, we can just put in our Boolean condition as the first argument or parameter for this function. You could also specify this as the condition by writing in condition equals and then your Boolean conditions here, but you don't need to do that. Pine Script knows that the first parameter of this function should be a Boolean input. The next thing we need to do is title this. I'm going to title this higher high, high close alert, and I'm going to give it a message. And in this message, if you come up to the alert dialog box and scroll down to the message box here, you'll notice this blue question mark button. If you click on this, it will list the special placeholders that you can use to access variable values in an alerts message. So for example, if we wanted to include the ticker name of the market we're on, right now we're on Bitcoin, XBT, USD would be the ticker. We could say here, higher high, higher close alert for, and then open 2 curly brackets, write in ticker, and close those brackets off. And this placeholder would be replaced with XBT USD when the alert's triggered, or it'll be replaced by whatever ticker you have loaded onto your chart when you set the alert. So that's it. It's that simple. Obviously, the more difficult part of alert conditions in your scripts is identifying the conditions to trigger the alert. Today's example is very simple. We're just looking for higher high, higher close candles. But you can use this alert condition function to trigger alerts for any condition that you want your script to fire an alert for. So now if I save the script, we've added alert functionality to it. If we come up and click on this create alert button or press Alt A or Command A on a Mac, we can now select our script from the condition drop down box. And that's this script name here. If you select this, by default, it's going to go to our higher high, higher close alert condition. We'll leave that as it is. And now you can set up this alert however you want to. So you could set it to once per bar close, and then the alert will only be triggered when the signal is confirmed by a bar close. You can set the expiration time, the various actions you want. Say if you want a push notification on your mobile phone or a pop-up on your chart, or you want the TradingView platform to send you an email when the alert's triggered, or this webhook URL is for third-party APIs. We're not going to get into that today. And finally, you can also play a sound if you want to notify you that you need to come and check your charts. And then finally, there's send email to SMS if you want to use that. Then we have alert name. This is different to the title. This is your alert name that shows up in your alert list. And so you can use this alert name to categorize your alerts if you have a lot of them. And then finally, we also have a bunch of other placeholders here, which I'm not going to go into too much detail about right now, because as I said, you can just click on this little question mark button and it explains in great detail how they all work. But you can even reference plot values in your messages. So if you were to write in here plot _0 within 2 curly brackets, in this case, our very first plot is this one here. It's just plotting the closing price, this blue number up here. If I were to add in that plot placeholder,
When the alert is triggered, let's come up here and click show pop-up. I'll turn those off and I'll click once per bar close. If I click create here, when this bar closes, it should trigger an alert since this candle here is a higher close candle. So let's wait and see what happens. There we have it. So notice that the XBT USD placeholder has been replaced. And we also added in our plot_0. In this case, that's just the closing price. So this is useful for third-party automation or for passing information to your alert that is relevant to your trade management. So for example, you could pass an RSI value or some such thing. But anyway, that's how you would set up an alert. That's a single alert function call. And that's how you set up your alert in the alert dialog box. But what if you wanted to have multiple alerts? Well, that's easy as well. We can just copy this line of code, paste it down here, change this to LLLC for lower low, lower close. If this Boolean variable is true, then this second alert function will be triggered, but only if we have set the alert in our alert dialog box. So if I save the script now, we come back up to our alert dialog box. When we select our script now under condition, if I click on that, we will now have multiple options here below our condition to select which alert we want to trigger. So if we just wanted higher close alerts to trigger, we'd click on that. If we wanted lower low, lower close alerts to trigger, we'd click on that one and set up the alert settings as we desire. So that's how you can use multiple alert types in your scripts if that is something you want to do. But otherwise, if you want to merge your alerts, so you only want to trigger one alert if either of these candlestick patterns are detected, you can just type in here higher high, higher close, or lower low, lower close. We can change our alert titles here. Now if I save the script, we come up to our alert box, select our script from condition. We now have a higher high, higher close / lower low, lower close alert. And this alert will be triggered if either a higher high, higher close candle or a lower low, lower close candle is detected. And so for most scripts, just leaving it like that would suffice. But if you're using third-party automation, which is a very complicated thing that we'll get into much later in the course, then you may want to separate your alerts like this. But that about sums it up for this lesson. We'll be adding alert functionality to a lot of the scripts that we write in this course. So this is just a quick crash course into how the alert condition function works. And we'll go over much more practical applications of this function in later lessons. So I hope you found this lesson interesting, and I'll see you in the next one.
So I figure it's probably a good idea to show you guys how to do your own research regarding scripts. If you run into a problem that this course doesn't cover and you want to, for example, there's a few inbuilt indicators that don't exist in TradingView at the moment. A good example of one of those is the Ichimoku cloud. I had a client ask me to add a Ichimoku cloud filter to a strategy script that I was creating for him, and I had to go and find the source code someone else had written to plot the Ichimoku cloud onto the chart because TradingView didn't have it as an inbuilt function. So I'll show you how I went about that here. So basically you just come to the scripts page on your TradingView homepage, and here are all the categories you could search through. But if you know what you're looking for, you just come up here, click on this little drop down box, come to scripts, and just type in Ichimoku cloud or whatever you're looking for. So now you just scroll through the list of indicators and look for one that meets the description of what you're looking for. Maybe something other than plebs be trippin'. Let's go to page 2. Here we go. Harry Potter. He's H. Potter. He's a really good Pine Script coder. Very famous on the TradingView platform for creating great scripts. This one he has nearly 15,000 likes, so he must have done something right here. So you can see here, this is actually written in Pine Script version 1 back in 2014 because there is no version annotation comment. But if you wanted to steal this code and use it in your own scripts, you could just copy everything here, open up your Pine Script editor, and just paste in this code here. If you save the script, just call it Ichimoku. Here I'll call it PSMC Ichimoku. Save the script. And now if you add it to the chart, you'll have this custom Ichimoku
code here working. But now say you want to convert this into version 4 so that it plays well with your whatever modern script you're writing. Just add in the version annotation comment here, set it to version 4. If you save the script, you'll get a list of errors. And depending on how complex the errors are, this could be easy or difficult to convert. If this happens to be a version 3 script, then you'll have this button here that just says convert to version 4. And if you click on that, it'll convert all of the code for you into version 4. Otherwise, you're going to have to do it manually. If it's a version 2 or 1 script, you're going to have to convert this manually. So here we have a list of errors, and they're all color errors. So that's pretty easy to work out. In the older versions of Pine Script, they did not have the color dot prefix for color types. So now if we just go through and add this to all of the color variable names here, and this one here. Now if we save the script, it will compile without any errors. It's now in version 4. You can come in and edit what you need to, and now you have your own Ichimoku Cloud script to work with in your own scripts. So now you could reference any of these variables to check if price is above or below it, and whatever other filters you want to check for. And then you could just come in and tidy up the code if you wanted to. And yeah. And then now you have your own Ichimoku code to reference in your script. So I know this is a pretty common sense lesson. Basically, if you run into a problem, just search the script library, see if someone's already written a script to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And if they have, just borrow the code. Of course, it's always good to reference the person who originally wrote the code in your own source code. That's a good matter of courtesy. But most Pine coders out there won't mind, unless it's a particularly sophisticated body of work or they specifically request credit. Most Pine coders won't care if you just steal their work. I know I don't. Don't forget you also have the power of Google. So you could type in here Pine Script, Ichimoku, and you may come across material here that is not covered on the TradingView platform itself. And that's all I had to say for this lesson.
And one last resource I forgot to mention is if you come to my website at theartoftrading.com, I have a list here. I've got plenty of resources here about trading in general, but I also have a list here of all of my free published indicator scripts, and the source code to most of them is included as well. So you can also use this as a resource. So I hope you enjoyed the basics course material. If you found it interesting, you want to learn more about Pine Script, head over to pinescriptmastery.com. I have a bunch of courses here. The free basics course has a few more lessons in it that weren't included in today's YouTube video. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the basics, this is a great place to start. There's also a discount code in there if you finish the course for the Mastery course. And the Mastery course is my flagship program. I go into a lot of detail here. There's 91 lessons and counting. I think by the time I release this video, they'll be closer to 100. I cover the basics of Pine Script. Everything in the Pine Script basics course is in this course as well, if you want to skip that and come straight to this course. But this one has a lot more info on more advanced subjects, like how to use indicators, how to detect specific candlestick patterns, even how to create your own profitable trading strategy scripts to run through the TradingView automatic backtesting system. I also publish updates to the Pine Script programming language as they release. Any important updates that the team makes to Pine Script, I'll create a lesson covering that new feature or that change to Pine Script. And if that's not enough Pine Script for you, there is my indicators and strategy scripts course where I teach you how I created every single one of my publicly released indicators for the TradingView charting platform. And there's well over 20 of them here, including a bunch of profitable strategy scripts that I've created. There's 3 new lessons coming soon, covering 3 various different trading strategies that I've created using Pine Script that are actually pretty profitable. So if you're interested in really taking Pine Script to the next level, taking your scripting to the next level, and shortcutting a lot of the hard work by stealing all of my best work, then maybe check this course out as well. I even have a section in here on auto view. So if you're a Forex trader, there is this fantastic Chrome browser plugin that allows you to automate your trading strategies. And I have a few running right now that are automatically executing trading strategy scripts that I've written while I'm asleep. It's absolutely brilliant. Couldn't speak more highly of it. And I have a bunch of new lessons coming for this browser plugin in the weeks to come. It's phenomenal. Anyway, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you made it to the end, you did a phenomenal job. I can see the back-end statistics for this course, and you'd be surprised at how few traders actually complete the basics course. So if you did complete this video, you are already in the top 1% of traders in terms of motivation. So best of luck with your trading. I am very confident that you are going to be successful if you keep putting in this sort of work. See you in the next video. Take care and good luck with your trading.